Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. It's your host, John Scardina. I am so excited for this episode. As I say, every week we have great people, but there's one person who stands out among the rest. Obviously, Pete Gaynor, the great Pete Gaynor, frequent flyer on the show. I think this makes number four of 5,000, something like that.
Yep.
Pete, welcome back.
Thanks, Sean. Good to be back.
So you've had quite the eventful fall. We've seen you flew overseas and you're helping out. And then actually when you were over there was a stampede in a stadium, and you and I talked a little bit about offline about that. And then Hurricane Ian hits, and you go and help out Team Rubicon, which is really cool to see that. By the way, before we get into all of that, very cool to see former head of FEMA getting out there and literally on roofs putting on tarps. We always talk about how you're a great example. That is being a great example. So, just thanks for helping across the field for sure.
Great.
So let's backtrack. Let's talk about stampedes and international relations. You were at our last DIPOP. I believe you're going back to DIPOP, and we talk about the dynamics of working with populations. And we can see it from the U.S. perspective of, hey, locality and local customs, local procedures, trying to instill best practice. But overseas, they might operate differently, right? Like you were talking about in Indonesia, how everybody operates with the same playbook. Can you walk us through how culturally that might be different?
Yeah. So maybe just a little background, just like how did I get to Indonesia? So prior to me becoming the FEMA administrator and as a state director, I had been on the program review committee and a commissioner for the Emergency Management Accreditation Program, or EMAP. And EMAP is one of my hobbies, I guess, because we got accredited in the city of Providence when I was the director there, and we also got accredited in the state of Rhode Island. So I like EMAP. I like the standards. I like how they help you build a program, no matter the size of emergency management agency that you run. And so a while back, Nicole, who runs the executive director, asked me if I was interested in volunteering, because it's all volunteers. They pay for all the travel, but you have to take time off or ask your company to go on duty. And so they had a program run by the State Department in Indonesia. The embassy in Jakarta wanted to do some kind of a baseline assessment of the Indonesian National Police Force. And unlike in the U.S., the Indonesian National Police own all the police from the very top to the very bottom, right? So it's not like in the U.S. where you have at the very top maybe the FBI, and at the very bottom you may have a local sheriff. And all different jurisdictions owned by or managed by different chiefs and sheriffs. This is all one force. I think the population of Indonesia is about 240 million.
Oh, I was going to say.
Yeah. And then police officers, about 400,000 in the Indonesian National Police. So we went there and we did an assessment with the State Department out of the embassy to kind of look at, offer some capability building to the police, because they're interested in how to become better, more efficient. They are essentially the first responders for everything that happens from the local level to the national level. So, along with their firefighter brothers and sisters, I think for pretty much, if there's something happening in a local community in Indonesia, there is a Indonesian police officer that is probably not too far away.
Real quick, we're going to pause for this week's Disaster Tough endorsements. How do you spell Doberman Emergency Management? EOP, OEP, HVA, HMP, Thyra, TTX, Drone, PDA. Whenever you need an expert, Doberman Emergency Management field experts are there for support. Contact an expert at DobermanEMG.com today. The L3 Harris Extreme 400p radio solves problems and is specifically designed for emergency services. How do we know? We field tested it with medical, urban search and rescue, and collapse and confined structures. This radio is amazingly tough. Check out the L3 Harris Extreme 400p radio at l3harris.com right now. Okay, let's jump back in. Interesting. So in terms of the pros and cons of that, obviously we see, we have all these different agencies and groups and authorities and jurisdictions, which streamlines and make things easier for locality. But in terms of a national perspective, are there pros to saying, hey, if we all had similar playbooks, obviously there's cons. We can talk about the cons, but in terms of the pros and lessons learned that we can gain from a different perspective, are there things where we say, hey, like, what can we take from that? Or is it all really all like, hey, people really should adopt the way we're operating?
Yeah. And one of the things I think we were careful about doing is trying not to compare Indonesian police to, or their practices to the way we do it in the United States, right? Because it's in some cases, I think it's unfair. And in some places where they're strong, maybe we're not as sophisticated, and vice versa. So we try not to compare each, apples to apples, because again, I think it's just an unfair comparison. And their method seems to work for them. I think, like everyone else, there's always room for improvement everywhere, to include the U.S. And one of the things, if you like standardization, right? If you really want things standardized, their method is that the headquarters, and I'm speaking in general terms here.
Right. Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
But the headquarters would write a plan for search and rescue, and that plan is basically the plan that they use from top to bottom. So every police department and every little district or province, they know how the other province or district operates, basically, right? Now, there's some goodness in that, I guess, because it's like ICS, right? If everyone speaks a common language, then you all know how everyone operates. I think the flip side of that is there's not a lot of room for discretion in some cases, right? Because it's a plan from the headquarters, you don't have a lot of discretion, and then you look at the United States, and I think we've learned, and I'll speak from the FEMA point of view. I think early on, we had tried to write specific plans for specific things, and everyone needed to adopt it. It didn't work because we realized that every state, every county, every city, every municipality is different and all unique. And so we developed a framework for everyone to operate by. And so those are kind of the differences. And I think if it works for you, it works. And you can learn lessons in both directions.
Yeah, Steve Johnson talked a little bit about this on one of his episodes. In addition to running the Seaburn program for all of British Army, he's also an educator, but he's also a police officer. Yeah. Which is ridiculous to me that he does all three. But he talks a lot about discretion and how, it's important to have discretion in terms of moments. After living in Japan a couple times, this is just world culture taken by John. Some things in culture are right and some things in culture are wrong, but most of it is just different. And if you can just recognize that, unless there's like major outliers where there's maybe harm that is being caused, I think it's fascinating to look at different cultures and how they approach different topics. I came home from Japan and I'm all American, right? But there's definitely things about Japanese culture that I learned to respect and instill in myself. And so it's just like anytime where I hear that somebody had an opportunity to be overseas and experience something that's totally different. Like our system works for us, right? Yeah. But hearing about other systems, it does make me wonder why different, right? And what are the pros and cons about being different? And I understand comparison, but in terms of like within that specific metric, with that being said, what an opportunity to go over there. But while you were over there, the stampede happens, right?
Yeah.
I mean, talk about.
I think a day or so before we leave. And we had just as kind of a reference, we had flown to Jakarta, and that's where the headquarters for the National Police is. And then two separate teams, we went around the country visiting 3 different locations, and tried to talk to not just the headquarters level, but the provincial level, and in some cases the district level.
Mm.
because we wanted to kind of again make an assessment and make some recommendations on best practices against the FEMA standards, right? So we tried to do that. So I think a day or so before we left, there had been a soccer match and I don't remember the city or the town or the province that had a soccer match, and there was some
it's like a miscommunication or something, right?
A team lost, and and one side got mad about it, and the Indonesian police tried to break up a riot or civil unrest and used tear gas. And again, not having been on the scene and not knowing all the details, they did what they did for whatever reason that they decided to do it. I think one of the factors in that is the International Soccer Association had prohibited the use of tear gas during soccer events, because you've seen in the past, not just in Indonesia but across the world, where a losing soccer team gets upset and they have some unrest, or they have a riot and things turn ugly. So they had outlawed, or at least prohibited in their rules, that no tear gas, riot agents could be used. So it didn't go well. I want to say
it did not.
Yeah, 170 or so dead, I think, trampled, and then a number of injuries in hospitals, crushing injuries, where people tried to leave the stadium, and doors were too narrow. Again, too many people in a stadium designed for much less, and then the list goes on, right? So I am sure that they're looking at their procedures. I'm sure that the president of the country and the populace and the legislators are having a hard look about practices, like, hey, why did you make that decision, and obviously try to remedy that for future events or future incidents that may occur.
So let me compare it to another incident, and I'm probably ask you a question here off of that. Seoul, Korea, Seoul, right? Just happened. They had a Halloween festival, and during the Halloween festival, something happened, and a riot, or not a riot, but a stampede. And again,
crushing event. Yeah,
crushing event. 150 plus dead, 150, or more injured through crushing injuries. From an emergency management standpoint, we obviously have large crowds here. You just saw the Tennessee-Alabama game this year, which is different, but it could have been dangerous, and it turned out not to be very dangerous. But from an emergency management perspective, when we're talking about crowds, and whether in Republic venues and like the city level, or we're talking about, large-scale events, what advice would you have for, the planning process between responders who would be doing that job, and to make sure that, I don't know, when the Macy Day parade happens in New York, if something happened, how would the city start to mitigate those things even before the event?
Yeah, I think it even starts with the individual level, just like everything else. It's individual preparedness. I have lots of friends who are cops, and I haven't been in the military. There's certain things that you're always concerned about. And so I just, whenever I go to dinner with one of my police officer friends, we always sit, facing the door, and so aware of your surroundings. Where's the exit? Where's the entrance? Who's in the crowd? Like, who's at dinner? I mean, it seems kind of overkill, but imagine to the Seoul Halloween party, that the last thing you're thinking about is what happened, right? It just, because you're out there having a good time, you're celebrating, right? It's a friendly environment. Like, it didn't start because of some bad act. It just started. So I would say the first thing is, whenever you're out, by yourself with your family, driving in this, wherever you go, you need to be aware of your surroundings, and actually have a plan in your head for scenarios, and I do it all the time, and maybe it's my military background, maybe it's my police friends that has rubbed off on me, but you gotta have a plan, right? And that's, again, when you look at FEMA and have a plan, right? You gotta have a plan for all that stuff. I would not leave anything to chance these days, and especially if you have younger kids. I have a daughter who's 24 years old, living by herself out in Chicago, and I worry about her every day. And I always tell her, like, keep your head on on a swivel, right? Don't be looking down at your phone. Don't be walking around aimlessly, right? Be out there with purpose. So I think that's the first thing you have to do, is try to convince people that, hey, you have to take care of yourself, right? How can a city like New York or any other jurisdiction, be responsible for every single thing that happens in their city every day, right? There's thousands of different things, that dangers and hazards and threats that happen. It's really on the individual to do that. So I think that's the first thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's 2 other podcasts on our network who are going to be listening to this episode, and they're going to be dying to have you on, because they talk about is individual preparedness. Nat Seller, Wesley Long, and Jason Perez. The idea about situation awareness is really interesting to me. Our network actually shared a video from Brazil where there was a yoga group, not a yoga group, some kind of like fitness group, and they were running in an outdoors, just on the sidewalk, but by a restaurant. And somebody got up, thought it was they were running away from something, and you see the entire restaurant get up and start running with them. They're just a running group. And for whatever reason, either somebody made a joke or somebody did something, but the entire crowd got up and started running with them, and they were just a running group. And that's kind of situational awareness, is that low level situation, is pretty embarrassing, to be honest, right? Like, we should be cognitive enough to say, okay, they're wearing jogging outfits, tennis shoes, they're in a group, there's nothing behind them, but things happen.
Yeah, and it takes effort, right? It takes effort, because you can't have your mind, in the locked and loaded position all the time. But it does take some effort to do those cursory things, again, to keep your, not to be over the top, right? I'm not talking about any of those things, but just to be reasonable and logical and preventive in things that could happen, right? I think we need to do more of that, whether it's some of these, unpredictable kind of things like a crushing incident, or it's a deliberate thing, like a hurricane or a tornado, like being prepared for those kind of things. I think it's more important than ever.
Yeah, but we've talked about this on the show before too. Like, how do you change a culture? There's New York Times article. Somebody came out and said 10% of the U.S. Considers themselves preppers. Right. And so, like, it talks about, the whole article talks about, like, anytime people talk about individual preparedness, they always go to the absolute extreme.
Yeah.
And yet there's this moment where it could be just a running group, or it could be, a fire in a building. It could be something a little bit smaller that, smart actions, a little bit of situational awareness can change everything. And even just knowing your insurance. I've asked a lot of my friends, especially after we had flooding in St. Louis, they said, "Oh, what can I do for next time?" I said, "How many of you know where your insurance policy is for your house?" And every single time they were like, "Ooh, I actually don't know where that's at."
Yeah.
It's like, well, that's the number one thing you should probably be aware of. You can update your Facebook status to safe later, call your insurance. So how do we change that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's, I think we're on like the extremes. Like, the majority of people probably do nothing, and then there's a certain percentage of the population which has grown over time. I think I saw that same report. Maybe it was a 60 Minutes thing or something, right? It's grown from 3% to 10% over the past couple of years, which is actually pretty interesting. And so on the far end of that are people that are digging holes and building bunkers and
spray painting trees purple or something.
Right. Yeah. All of it. I think if you could find the magic in between, right? Because when you say be prepared and have 7 days of food or 14 days of food and water and insurance and all medicine, I think some people like roll your eyes about, well, why are you worrying about that? We live in the greatest country in the world. We have everything at our fingertips. We can go out and do and buy anything in the moment. We just have to call Amazon. And today you can get whatever you ordered this morning delivered on your front porch. So why do I need to be prepared? So and I've talked about this before. It is really one of the hottest challenges to try to convince people to take some action, right? Even if it's just like one little bite at a time, and small actions to make yourself and your family and your business and your community just better prepared.
Yeah, I'm gonna throw it.
It's not that hard. You have to be purposeful. In some cases, it doesn't cost any money, right? I mean, and this was the challenge, I think, at FEMA when you kind of look at the country and say, yeah, everyone needs to be prepared, but everyone can't afford to be prepared, right? You have to realize that the demographics have a wide range of ability and capability and financial wherewithal, right? So you got to find that I won't say middle ground, but that sweet spot that entices more people to take action on their own.
Yeah, those who should do, those who can't, we should help, right? Like that's really where it comes down to for me as like that humanitarian side of being an emergency manager, because there's sometimes I've gotten out to disasters and it's been like, why? Like you could have avoided this situation. As somebody who very close to me just went through the ringer from Hurricane Ian, and they had every capability, knowledge, skill set, stuff to get out, and they didn't, and they got another impacted.
Yeah. So
my heart breaks for them, but at the same time, it's like we should
let's talk about
that.
Ian because it's an interesting examination, especially from my point of view, having been on
the ground.
Well, serve. Again, I've served as a local and a state and as the federal emergency management administrator, and then to go down as just a volunteer to see and live it, right? You just don't fly in or fly out, because I think that's kind of the easy thing to do sometimes. And I think it's necessary. You have to do that, right? You don't want to impede the rescue or restoration of a
for taking pictures.
So I realized, and we're talking about my Team Rubicon event I did a couple of weeks ago in Florida, Port Charlotte. I realized as the FEMA administrator, I've approved mission assignments, and those are things that this is how you get another agency to do something for you in the federal government. You mission assign an agency. So we mission assign the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to do the Blue Tarp mission, and they're really good at it. And the average Blue Tarp mission, I don't know how much it costs, but let's just say it costs $50 million for a big disaster like Ian. So as the administrator, I approve it, and you feel pretty good about it. And then, the public affairs people in a couple of weeks show you pictures of blue tarps on roofs, and you say, well, we're making progress down there. Right. And then I've had the ability now to of the $50 million in blue tarps and furring strips and nails and tape, I've got to hold one of those a couple dozen of those nails that the $50 million bought and bang them into a roof one nail at a time.
Right.
And so that whole thing is a pretty humbling experience, having lived both ends of it.
Yeah. I mean, talk about you can't get any further from both ends of that spectrum, right? That's pretty phenomenal. Do you think your perspective, if you went back and were approving those missions, do you think you would either do it differently or would you feel some sense of more ownership of that? Like any changes that you would have made?
Here's the, we in Port Charlotte, and I was on the, we had a couple forward operating bases down there. And so we were in a couple communities, Holiday Park, retirement community over 55, and Inglewood South, another retirement community over 55.
Wow.
All made up of mobile homes or modular homes. And
right there too,
right. It was devastating. So my first inclination, right, if I was a FEMA administrator today, I would outlaw mobile homes. They are
Awesome.
insufficient, and especially like if you look, and they're nice, right? They're nice, but they're not nice for Florida or for Louisiana or for Alabama or for Mississippi or for the Gulf Coast of Texas or anywhere there's a disaster, maybe even an earthquake, right?
Tornadoes. Tornadoes
Tornadoes,
aim
right?
for they aim for these mobile home parks for sure.
They're not built for it. So in this community, I just give an example of Holiday Park community, about 400 mobile homes, very, very nice community prior to Ian, right?
Yeah.
Mostly all retirees. There's not a 2x4 or a 2x6 to be found, right? So I live in New England, and all the houses here, probably these days, are all built with at least 2x4s and probably more common 2x6s. It's the weather. It's it's all those kind of things.
Yeah.
But they're well built. They're well built homes. Expensive homes, but well built homes. And then you have mobile homes, and it's a great place to retire. But when you see these things opened up like a spinach can, right? You have to scratch your head about why would we allow people in hurricane-prone areas like Florida to live in substandard construction. I'm saying they're nice, right? But substandard construction,
Yeah.
2x2,
Yeah.
2x2 wooden ceiling joist, with aluminum siding and foam. When you go down, you can probably go down there now in some of these places, and all that you see is styrofoam boards all broken up everywhere, aluminum siding everywhere, in trees and bushes, in the water, and then all your contents of your home all over the place, right? And the majority of these people have retired to Florida for the rest of their life, and so they're not working anymore. They retired. They're probably on an income that's generally restricted to what they've saved, and now these homes become unlivable. And in Florida, right, if it gets wet inside, black mold grows instantaneously. You walk in these communities and you can smell the black mold. So I would outlaw them. They're absolutely inferior living conditions in the U.S., especially in places that have hurricanes or tornadoes. It's a crime. It's a crime.
Well, that brings me back to Hurricane Harvey. We were doing some kind of model testing like several months after, and went down to Corpus Christi, and I couldn't believe it looked as if the hurricane passed through 5 days ago and it was 3 months later. And people forget how much damage and how, like, after the news leaves, they are still going to deal with debris for months and years and all that stuff. And so it's like, man, anytime we can help eliminate that. George Siegel has a great documentary for those who are listening about The Last House Standing that addresses this, about building codes.
Yep.
There's a lot of people addressing building codes, and yet after what was it, Joplin, Missouri, after the tornado went right through the town, Missouri had an option to build better, use better building codes, and they opted not to use them. And it's like, how do you fix stupid? Like, that's really what it comes down to me. It's like, we know that mobile homes don't do well with anything, with any kind of natural hazard. We know that we shouldn't build in, flood zones, floodways, if you look at Texas. And yet, anytime this opportunity arises where we're like, hey, this is something simple that can just stop us spending a lot of extra money for no reason, we don't really take those opportunities when they arise.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned building codes. I think building codes are one of the most important things we can do as emergency managers, right? Is that because that's where it all starts, right? If you want to build a resilient community, you want to have a community that when a disaster comes through your community, you can bounce back quicker because you had stronger building codes, and you were smart about how you zoned different things and kept people away from, in some cases, if you had a flooding issue, away from the water or potential flooding locations. We have to be smarter about that. And I've said before, you know, it, the cost of disasters and the frequency of disasters and the intensity of disasters is becoming unaffordable, right? So let's be smart about it. And I think we're on a better track today with all the mitigation money that we've that we've gotten from actually both administrations. I think we're on the right track. We need to do more, but it really is the thing that makes us stronger. Is just stronger building codes, right? And that is a local issue, right? Very few states and the federal government has very little impact on what happens locally with building codes, but it's a local issue, and you have a lot of sway if you're on a town council or city council or just a resident that wants to live in a safer community. You have a voice, and you should use it. And I think it should actually be for associations like International Association of Emergency Management, NEMA. Building code should be like on the top 10 of a national platform about what we care about as emergency managers in the country.
Absolutely. That's like probably the soundbite that we're taking from this. It's like that's like situational awareness for just like how you can dramatically impact like the preparedness conversation. For all those who I've actually had, funny enough, some people have pretty low situational awareness about building codes, and they say, well, why do building codes really matter? If you wonder why we're not impacted by every time there's an earthquake, right here in the US, you're welcome. Like earthquake, building codes matter. Look at Japan. It was the tsunami in 2011 that rocked their country, not the actual earthquake, because of building codes. And so one of the ways, and you're talking about joining and working with your local community. One thing that I did recently is I joined my local chamber of commerce. They have schools on there. They have government. They have all these committees with working with economics and even with the state legislature. All these groups this is a really influential chamber of commerce. Luckily enough for me, because where I live, but it was a way for me to start interacting with people. And I'm the only person in that room. There was, I don't know, 500 people in the room who had any kind of knowledge about disasters. I had superintendents come up to me. We had the mayor come up to me. We had somebody from the governor's office. We had somebody from the next state over who was who's visiting. All come up to me. I didn't even have to go to them. And they say, "Hey, you know about disasters?" Because it was right after the flooding. And said, yeah. And so we started talking about business continuity, and we talked about building codes, and we talked about active shooters in schools, and we talked about multiple resource officers, and we talked about all these different things. And funny enough, the only time in my entire career where I don't have to go to somebody, they all come to me because I'm just part of the crowd. And I think that's what emergency managers need to do. We need to think of creative and different ways to get involved with our community, where they see John, they don't see the EMA who's trying to push agenda where they're looking at their budget all the time, right? Like getting involved and being more interesting and than just our one lane, I think can help out in a lot of different areas. And I think it's a pretty clever way to attack situational awareness. But that being said, there has to be countless ways that emergency managers are trying to help our community. So I'm just calling out my audience right now. If you found some different fun way to interact with people and get them to come to your table versus the other way around, let us know in the comments. Put it in Disaster Tough Podcast on social media, because we need to raise the level of situational awareness in our country for sure.
Yeah, I've done numerous local events, state events, federal events, and I think the one thing that sticks with me is that people just don't know, right? And then it's not, we all live a busy life, and we all have these priorities: the kids, the school, the car, the job, and very few of us, right? Maybe you and I, in our free time, are researching disaster stuff because we're big disaster geeks, right? But I think just the average American just doesn't know because again they have a busy life. So I think when you provide them information that they haven't heard before that is valuable, then I think you can start turning some heads on that. So I think we just need to do more of that, more education. You don't have to ram it down their throat. Americans are really smart, but you need to do more of it. And again, I've said it before. I think preparedness is one of the hardest things that emergency manager has to do. Right? We can get your attention and keep your attention for a short period of time, like during a oncoming or potential disaster, right? I think the American public pays attention to that, right? But it doesn't last long before we go on to our normal lives, right? Whatever that is. So yeah, you can do it in a disaster, but I think the trick is, how do you do it on a more consistent year-round basis, right? And again, gain their attention, keep their attention, and then encourage them to take some action to protect their family, their business, and themselves.
You could say Gaynor their attention, if you will. Is that a pun?
Sounds like a dad joke to me, John. I don't know.
I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. We're working on the dad jokes. We're still improving.
Right. Yeah.
Hey, I'm just going to do one last call out here because we're talking about situational awareness. We're talking about good things. There's a company out there that was just featured on the New York Times, Instinct Ready. I happen to know them very well. They're also on our podcast network. But Instinct Ready, you look at emergency kits and you look at go bags, and pretty much everybody does the same thing. But only one group has been on the New York Times because they're like they reinvented something that people didn't think they could reinvent, and making it more logical. The best emergency preparedness. Now that's a blacklisted word in my company. We say readiness, but the best readiness in that you can provide is like convenience and making your life easier, whether it's small events or big events. Gaining that situational awareness, doing things, changing the messaging to make it a bit more, and doing more in the community. All these things, it's not like a one or nothing, right? There's lots of different ways to look at this. I mean, Pete, you were just overseas talking about different cultures. You're in Hurricane Ian and talking about what you do as an administrator now. Constant learning, helping the different community. Great example, Pete, for everything you've done. And we'll keep attacking this message on how to help people and gain their own situational awareness. So thanks again for coming on the show.
You're welcome. Good to see you, John.
Okay, everybody, as always, the shameful, if you like this episode, we need a 5-star rating and subscribe. If you got something from the great Pete Gaynor, if you've Gaynored your knowledge, I don't know if that's going to take off or not. It probably won't. But if you gain something from, well, yeah, prove me wrong. Make sure Gaynor your knowledge is a hashtag on these posts. We really like ideas. We want to be innovative. That's what makes people disaster tough, right? Best decisions, best timing, right message, right people, all that kind of stuff. So put out your ideas on Disaster Tough Podcast on all our social media channels, and we'll see you for the next one.